now that we kind of understand how factor demands work, you really, and the way we tend to work with the factor demands is in terms of thinking about the world this way. And before I go forward, let me make one little point. There's two ways of looking at production. One is to look at it directly, which is by looking at the primitive production function problem. The other is to look at it kind of from the cost function point of view, right? Those are two different approaches to thinking about the world. One is to say, I'm going to approach the problem specifying a cost function and work with the cost function. And the other one is to think about the production function. And depending on the problem you have available, it may be easier to use one approach than the other. The basic way you want to think about it is, oh man, what am I doing? This is W1 up to Wn. That is, so you can think about the first order conditions for this problem is P times partial F partial Xi equals Wi, right? Those are the first order conditions for that problem. Whereas the corresponding conditions here are Xi equals Ci of W1 up to Wn and Y. All right, that's the two approaches. And then you can put in the marginal price equals marginal cost if you want. P equals Cy of W1 up to Wn and Y. Those are the two kind of approaches you can take. You can take like a production function approach where you think about the world in terms of value marginal product of input I has to be equal to the wage of input I. Or you can think about it, I got to be on my factor demand curve, which is really coming off the cost function. And for different problems, it's going to pay to look at it different ways. Basically, if you want to hold quantities of other inputs constant, very nice to use the production function, because that's what the production function does. Production function is looking at how much of input I do I want to use, holding constant the use of all the other inputs, right? They're holding quantities constant. The cost function says, nah, we've optimized out all those other things, so let's look at the demand for factor I holding the prices of other inputs constant. Okay, and sometimes you want to hold prices constant, sometimes you want to hold quantities constant. Often in practice, it corresponds to different experiments. That in some cases, it's reasonable to think that maybe roughly quantities are fixed of other inputs. In other cases, you want to think of quantities of other inputs as variable. If you want to think about a more mixed world where quantities of other inputs are, some are variable and some are fixed, then you kind of got to use a hybrid. You got to either modify this approach or modify that approach. And I think I talked before about how you could modify this approach and think about this iterative solution back and forth between labor and capital. You could do that in that picture there, or you could start over here and then do what we did before, which is what does factor demand look like if you hold some quantities fixed. You can start here and fix quantities or go to there. All right? Any questions that people have?